Hi, John. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. How's things going with you?
Yeah, great. Today, you are going to be on the other side of the questions, unlike what you're used to on your Champagne Strategy show. I thought it would be good to interview you because we've had so many great conversations offline, and I think there's some gold there that other founders and CEOs who may not be aware of who you are really do actually need to know. So, why don't we kick off with you telling everybody who you are and a little bit about what you do.
Great. So I'm John. I live in Brisbane at the minute. I used to live in Melbourne, used to live in San Francisco, South Korea, Canada. So I've been here for a while now, but I help companies with their commercial strategy. And when I use those two words, commercial means generally for financial, monetary value gain. And strategy includes execution. So it's not just a plan, it's like how to achieve that. So that's quite multifaceted if you want to get down to the weeds if you want. But originally, I sort of come from a marketing strategy background, worked in lots of different jobs, and I've since sort of gone up from that functional strategy marketing layer up into more what we call business strategy because a lot of other components flow into commercial outcomes, not just some of the marketing or what most people think marketing is anyway. So that's a quick mo.
Okay, absolutely. There's a lot obviously that we could unpack if we had the time, but you did touch on something there that's pretty core to why we decided to try and have this chat today, and that is not what most people think marketing is. So I think that's a big, I guess, misperception out in the marketplace. You're currently running a pretty interesting survey which touches on this as well. So do you want to tell everybody a little bit about what you're doing there?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I was commissioned by a couple of publishers after a couple of podcast interviews that I've done, panel discussions around topical things that are going on. And as part of that, I had to define some of these terms for myself because the piece is on brand campaigns, which is a term that gets sort of thrown around quite a bit. And what I quickly realized when I was researching this topic was that no one really knew what a brand campaign was in the first place. And then obviously I had to then define what a brand is, and most people don't know what that is either. So that sort of led me to then question, hang on here, are there some very basic terms that we use all the time in business that people are inherently either don't understand or number two are very misaligned on? I needed some primary research, right, to back up some of the claims I was making. Otherwise it's just someone's opinion. So I decided to, and this has been in the back of my mind for a couple of years now, I decided to do a proper primary research survey on this. So I'm asking three groups of people: a control, people outside of business, or executive and the function itself. What are these words? What do they mean to them? Because sometimes the layman's understanding of it can be more true than people inside business. And then I'm asking executives, so people who resource and fund the function, what they think these terms mean. And then I'm comparing that with people inside the function, so CMOs, marketing managers, head of growth, whatever those people are called, what they think of these things and how they define them. And I'm testing how divergent those three groups are. And it's been really, really interesting.
I am privy to some of those questions, so I personally cannot wait for the results to come out. One of the key issues that I think gets super misunderstood in business is the relationship between marketing strategy, or even just marketing, if we just want to really get simple, and business strategy. What I see people thinking it is like an add on activity that they do after they are already finished building out the business plan, setting up what the business is going to do and how it's going to operate and function, even selecting the services or products that they want to sell. Then the final stage almost is marketing. Would you unpack for us actually what marketing really is and how it relates into business strategy?
Yeah, great. So I think you hit on the money there. There's two interpretations: one, what it really is, and one, what most people think it is. And this is what the research is finding as well. Look, the marketing is in its name, market. So it's about bringing the force of the market back into the organization and getting congruency there between what the organization is producing and selling and what the market actually wants. That's dynamic, that changes over time. Obviously, that's very multifaceted, but the more divergent you are from that, the harder it is generally your businesses to reach its commercial goals, right? The closer you are, and the best businesses in the world do this. Amazon, if you listen to anything Jeff Bezos says, very much it's all about the consumer, that's all they care about. Obviously, he says that knowing that staff and operations are very critical as well, and distribution. But like the point is, at its very essence, it's about the force of the market. Now, the issue with that and why this causes so much friction is that that challenges the internal culture of the organization and egos and people's assumptions internally. And it's just like anything. If you've worked in a particular sector before, or a job, or whatever, you can kind of become institutionalized. And you can make lots of assumptions about what's actually going on in the broader population, because you're working in this sort of little bubble, we call it, and you can suffer from Ivy Tower syndrome, where you're sort of just peering down. You think you know what's going on, but because you're so disconnected from the market, you can make really bad decisions unknowingly, often as well. And then you've got a layer of politics, which incentives, but we won't go there. The point is, bring the force of the market back into the organization. So the primary key that kind of comes through I would say three departments most specifically: marketing, sales, and customer service, or frontline sort of people who deal with the customers. They're the people who have the most raw interaction with the end customer. And for that reason, they are the most exposed to it and probably have the best sort of ear to the ground about what's working, what isn't. And for me, if we want to use that term, it's just about listening to those people who are listening to the customer and bring that back into decision making. Now, most people think marketing, and it has been box-holed more generally, I think, and I've been researching the history on this, which is actually really fascinating. So marketing agencies started in the 1930s with newspapers. It was the Great Depression. There was payment issues with accepting advertisements, and there's a lot of non-payment risk, as you can imagine, because people were struggling. So then agents were created to act as a broker in that transaction. And it's sort of more from that to these Mad Men days. Anyway, the point is, over time, the media expenditure was a very large line item. And then that has sort of skewed the function towards what I'd call sort of advertising or promotions. Advertising is a subset of promotions, but it's been very much focused on that one P. Now, if you go back more pre-1960s, it's a bit more balanced, and this still happens in some companies, but I would say it's the four P's or five P's or whatever you want to call it. But it's always this interplay between product, pricing, promotions, and distribution or place. Good marketing that works is a complex system of those variables, and they all interrelated. They all have to work together. So if you just isolate one of them away and call it promotions, and then load all your expectations of performance onto one and disconnect that from the others, it's going to be very risky and not very successful. And I think that's what people get wrong. But yeah, that's the long answer to your question, I suppose.
No, I think it's a really important way to sort of paint that bigger picture context for what it is, and what its real function is, and how it's actually a critical and integral part of the substance of the business itself, rather than an activity, as you say, that is just around promotion, that you can sort of tack on afterwards, or start or stop doing, which really does kind of apply to certain promotional activity, where you may have a particular campaign, you may start it now, you may stop it later, you're testing and measuring different things. The business is still existing, the products are still there, the price is still there, all of those, the market forces, as you said, are still operating.
I mean, and I'll probably add to that. I just forgot to mention, I think what I was trying to explain there is what we call market orientation. And great marketing is a very, very simple switch of perspective within the culture of the entire firm. One that is internal, inside out, like, hey, we've got this thing, we've got this awesome product, let's sell it, versus outside in. Understanding a market, what do they want? What triggers them? What are the buying situations? Like, where are they? What do they do? What other things are they purchasing? Who are they purchasing it with? Like, where, when, why, how? And then bring that back in the organization, use that to your advantage. And you'll notice this with just even very simple things like an executive writing something on social media. They can just assume that people are interested in things because they're interested in it. And it's just understanding who your audience is and what they want and reverse engineering that. It's so simple, but no one does it by default.
Do you think that's because that's not how we've been trained? And so people are just doing what they have seen other people doing?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things, I would say. It's a very unnatural thing. It takes a certain level of self-awareness. So you need to separate you and yourself and your ego and your skills and realize that, hey, I'm doing this for someone else. And that's a big barrier that I think requires a level of maturity and mental maturity as well. And also a political situation or culture within the firm that rewards that thinking, as opposed to rewarding like an internal sort of focus. I know when you have very political organizations, it's just about getting up the tree and who cares about the customers? Like they're very secondary to the primary aims of that person. So this does vary quite a bit, but and that's why the executives really have to push this down. And that's why I'm saying it's a very unnatural thing, because it's got to be enforced at very high levels to counteract that natural force that is inside out looking.
And so, would you say then that there is actually a lot that influences marketing that comes from what people call culture?
Yes, yes, and that's what I'm saying. Like the culture is so critical, and it's unnatural, so it needs to be sort of trained or instilled in people over a period of time. And that's what I'm saying about this market orientation. You can get very technically smart people, very adept at what they do, but they need to be orientated around the strategy of like, why are we doing this, for whom, what are we achieving. And that again is kind of unnatural. If left alone to their own devices, they can be very technically brilliant. You can have a really good team, everyone could be doing lots of busy work and exceeding in these internal goals, but it sort of falls flat on the commercially. And that's kind of my skill of like getting to reorientate around, we're doing this to earn money so that we can all earn more money, so that we can pay off our mortgages and send our kids to school and buy nicer cars and all that kind of thing. So it is in their interest, but everyone needs to do it and that's where the culture comes in. I think it's like that, it's instilling that unnatural force over time, and it's about counteracting people who just want to talk in buzzwords and fluff in meetings and report on metrics that don't really matter. Nice, they look great in a presentation. Your consultant can come in and everybody says, oh, that's great, but like at the end of the day, does that do anything? It's a very, very different culture, and I think executives need to lead that and enforce that.
Where does brand fit into all of this? Because when I think of culture, obviously we start to get to sort of Simon Sinek territory where we sort of go with the start with why stuff. And that's where brand is often sort of brought in to the conversation. So where do you see brand fitting in?
I did some research on that as well. That's that sort of this thought culture that started with like Brené Brown, and then Simon Sinek sort of branched off that. It's all about sort of values, and that has been very dominant in the marketing campaigns as well. It sort of started with Think Difference, Apple, and I would say '97, and it sort of branched off that. And in fact, I researched that. That's based on a lie as well. It wasn't commercially successful, but that's another story. The point is, I'm writing about it soon, so you can read the piece. But the point is, it's been very popular from a hiring perspective as well. So, but to answer the question around brand, brand is mental real estate in your audience. Best way I can explain is there's lots of brand contact points or ways that your consumers and staff and everything can interact with your company. Maybe it's your office, maybe it's where they go and buy you, maybe it's an ad that you have set up somewhere, an event that you attend, a website that you visit, a social media post. These are what we call brand contact points, or all these different ways that people can interact with you. And at that point, they'll get a vibe for like who you are, what you're about, how you talk, what you look like, all these kind of things. And it forms like a memory in their mind or a mental image of you and your products and services, right? So that's kind of what a brand is at its essence. And I think people get caught up in this notion that, hey, we need to talk about beliefs and values at an organizational level, and that's the reason why people buy us or not buy us. That is based on a popular assumption, and that needs to be tested. And from my experience, that's very rare to be only the case, and that's why it was interesting doing this Apple Think Different analysis, because that's the assumption that everybody made, that hey, it's about thinking different and we're here to change the world. But the reason for their financial success during that time period was not due to the campaign. It was due to products and distribution changes and pricing changes. So the other P's of marketing. And yeah, sure, this brand ad was running and was awarded by the industry, because the industry likes to give themselves pats on the back, but it didn't really push the commercial metrics of the company forward. It did, however, help with attracting talent, and it did, however, help with like sealing partnership deals and things like that, but didn't directly increase profit, sales, market share, market cap, things like that.
That is a really, really interesting thing to discuss another time. But here's one of my questions about all of this stuff is we talked before about how critical a role culture plays in the way that people perceive the role of marketing and their role individually in, gathering that feedback and having that empathy for what the market is looking for. Um, And then we've talked about brand being, all of those touch points, or say the collective place in the mind that somebody puts you after they've interacted with a bunch of your stuff. So when I think about brand and culture, I think that they are actually aligned, very aligned. And I see the value and the place for articulating certain core values when they are meaningful, not things like honesty and integrity, but things that actually do help the management team, the executive team, and everybody else underneath them to align their sort of thinking and acting. Do you feel like that would be true in your experience, or do you see it a different way?
Most people think of brand campaigns, they think of like a promotional campaign that doesn't talk about the product. So they talk about this like organizational branding initiative that's visual and talks about something. The problem with branding is that inconsistencies can creep in. So we might want to project a better image than what is actually the case internally or at the front line of customer service, for example. And there's political benefits to that, but the audience will see through that a lot. So you can say your culture is XYZ. You can do an advertising campaign and some nice materials that says, hey, we're contributing to this and we're this orientation, whatever, right? That's nice, but do people actually feel that internally? And I think it's doing what you say you're going to do as well. Like, and I think the doing part is more powerful because then it becomes a lot more authentic and harder for people to see through. And I think that's what a lot of people miss. Yeah, I was talking about culture the other day, and we can have these in services and everything, but like you can work hard and have a pretty commercially focused culture, and that can be really good and people get motivated by it. And it's like, I think it's not always we need a higher purpose for existence, you know what I mean? Like that's a big assumption.
It's so true, actually, what you said there. And I think people really conflate this idea with having a purpose or having values, or, a good culture with certain values, or a certain culture being good and all others being bad. And I believe exactly what you just said there. For some people, their values are profit at all costs. Their values are commercial success, and that's the only thing that drives me. I am motivated by the highest possible salary someone's going to pay me. I want to work all the hours known to man. I don't care about anything else. I think we have to be really careful that we are not painting the world into black and white, because when I do the work I do, helping companies to hire for key roles and helping them to create talent strategies and to hire in a way that helps them with that alignment internally, we see all the time that different people are driven by different things. And I think organizations, CEOs, founders are actually a bit terrified, like you just said then. They're actually a bit terrified to own the truth of what their business stands for, how they do things, and what their true values are, because they feel like they're going to be vilified. They feel like they're not going to be able to attract people. But I always encourage them to be honest and open, because candidates on the other side, and customers equally, they are looking for a certain thing. Not everybody wants soft and fluffy. Not everybody wants, kumbaya and, work from home. A lot of people want to come into the office. They want to work from 7 till 7. They want to make big money. So I think that's really, really critical, is to actually know what the culture is you want to set. What are those core values? And then, as you said, walk the talk. Don't pussyfoot around things and try and say one thing and do another, because that's where you get that cognitive dissonance, right? And you get people just going, what the hell is this? It's not consistent. It's not lining up.
Yeah, and I think, look, employers can see through that facade pretty quickly. And if they don't see through it when you first hire them, they'll see through it in the first week of work. When I go into organizations and, I try and help them sort of grow and increase their commercial metrics, literally 30 seconds in the office where the staff are, I can tell whether it's going to work out or not just by the vibe in the office. Like, come into this thing and just everyone's at the desk, sort of looking over the shoulder and very quiet. I know, yeah, this isn't a team that's going to perform. I mean, this is, attaining, like, it's very competitive in markets, and I think people overlook the fact that if we don't grow, someone else is going to overtake us. So like, there's nothing wrong with, I think, a culture of just professional excellence, like commercial excellence, and that can breed a really good culture. I've been in with lots of sales teams that just killing it, right? Do they have a good product? Are they saving the world? Probably not, arguably sometimes, but like, wow, they've performed, and then those people have, bought houses and started their own businesses and everything. It's like it's really exciting to work inside those teams, and you sort of get caught up in that excellence, and like you want to be better, and like that's a culture. They're not saving the world, they're not even donating to charities. You know what I mean? Like you don't need to have that. I think it's just giving the permission to executives to like take a firm stance on something. Don't be afraid to do that.
Absolutely. And that then comes back around, doesn't it, into your marketing?
Yeah, yeah. Look, and to answer the question before about, I think we probably need to talk about these layers of strategies. I really like. I interviewed this guy called Bryant Graves. He's now sort of at a very senior strategy level at Snowflake, which is a large data firm. It's publicly listed, like multi-billion-dollar company. Anyway, before that, he was at Walmart, right? So very large corporate organizations, some of the biggest companies in the world. And he has a really good breakdown. And I think there's four sort of layers of strategy, right? And I think this is where people get confused with marketing and its place within this, because it's really important. But he kind of views it as a pyramid. So at the top, we got corporate strategy. This is when your business is big enough to have multiple business units, and there's M&A stuff. And I don't get involved with that, and I don't think perhaps some of your listeners would be in there. That's not me, right? That's get your McKinseys or whatever to help with that. The business strategy layer is next, right? And this is the core thing. Like, who are we? What are we producing? For whom? Why does it matter? Who's our audience? Who are we targeting? What are we producing? Like all these kind of very what I call business model, very core things that go across the whole organization. Next level down from that is, and that's kind of where I play, but then I translate that into the next level, which is functional layers, which is HR, marketing, sales, frontline, whatever the departmental function structure of your business. That business strategy has to flow down to all of them in different areas, but it should be consistent. And it's coming back to like brand and sort of core marketing strategies, that more of that business layer that will filter down via who we are, what we're about, what we stand for, our culture, all that it should flow through into all those functions really. But then in that functional layer is the marketing one, which again can vary quite a lot in terms of what they're allowed to do or what they have purvey over. And that's sort of where I then translate to the next layer, which is operational strategy, which is like the people who are going to execute as an agency, internal teams, all that sort of that messy part that really is essential but gets overlooked because that's where the rubber hits the road, where you need to like execute really well. And I think that layer is the most underappreciated and most critical layer in anything that is a complex system, because small details there or small oversights can have a massive impact on every other performance layer from that point upwards.
I love that actually. It's so nice and clear. When you have a look at some of the biggest mistakes that, let's say, SMEs in Australia are making when it comes to marketing, do you feel like there are any themes that emerge for you?
Yes, the biggest one, just talking about SMEs, but there's some things that like apply to all size businesses, regardless. So like first principles they get overlooked, but SMEs, I would say they try to use a big brand playbook, and they're just not quite there yet, and they shouldn't be using that playbook. So large companies with large market share tend to use a defensive playbook, not an offensive playbook. So they've already got their market share. They're there to earn little incremental point percentages of more sales or whatever. And so therefore their marketing changes quite a bit to more of that sort of fluffy brand level, because they don't need to sell, because they've got that base, they've got their distribution network, they've got the partnerships, and they can afford to waste money. The danger is if you're a smaller brand, and this happens all the time, they'll hire a head of marketing from a larger company because they want to be larger, or a corporate person, even worse. They come into this small organization that doesn't have many staff. It's probably not resourced to the same extent, doesn't have the same agency partnerships or whatever. And then they try to use that playbook, and they're not there yet. And they think they want to emulate that bigger brand. It just fails every single time. So I think that's the biggest mistake I'd make, is that every single company is in a very contextual, unique situation, and need someone independent to kind of do your strategy internally and not rely on that strategy from a new hire or an agency, especially. That's the other mistake. Never source your strategy, measurement, and execution from the one vendor. And that's what SMEs do. They go to an agency. Well, what should we be doing? They recommend obviously what they sell. Then they get sold what that person does, and then they rely on them to mark their own homework as well. Should always separate those out into three different people. So a lot of the time they bring me in to do the strategy. This is what we should be doing. Okay, how can we do that? Maybe it's an agency, maybe it's not, maybe it's internal. I don't know. And then metrics should always be measured again independently because you need that feedback loop to self-improve and grow. So those are probably the two biggest things. So just to iterate, using a big brand playbook as a small brand, and then not separating out those three things for your feedback loop of growth.
Those are actually gold. I mean, I've heard a lot of conversations about the biggest mistakes people make, and they tend to be quite tactical, the conversations I've heard. But those two are very, very valuable distinctions for people. And if I could add something just to the second one there, I feel like when people are making those decisions, probably because marketing is seen as that add-on, and because it's seen as, you can do all those three layers in the one resource. The mistake I've seen founders and CEOs make, because I'm looking at it through the hiring lens, is they think they can get one person to come in who can do strategy and execution, right? So they think, well, what we're going to do is we'll hire this head of marketing, and then they've got a litany. I used to call it the marketing unicorn when I was hiring into those kind of roles. A litany of tasks/responsibilities, including setting strategy all the way down to editing copy on the website, and everything in between: social media, video editing, you name it, Google AdWords, SEO. It's just absolutely impossible. And I don't believe that founders are making those mistakes on purpose. I just think it's this complete lack of awareness or understanding of these different layers and the complexity in each. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, big time. And it's getting worse. So this didn't used to be the case. Like I interviewed Katie Daly from Thinkerbell. It's a sort of large marketing, advertising, creative agency. And she said, look, not too long ago, the brief came on my desk. She was working agency side, right? The client brief would come on her desk and she said, oh, it was like, one 30-second TVC, one 15-second TVC, a couple of radio spots, and like, a press ad, full-page press ad, and maybe a billboard. And she's like, now it's like, you've got a social media, you've got multiple social mediums between that, you got online, website, blah, 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 blah. It's just like the complexity is crazy. And I think that is a big issue, is this scope creep, I call it, within the role. Like suddenly you're in a internal service role, like being a service organization within your business. Like, can you make this look pretty? Can you write this for that? Or can you help brief me on this? And like suddenly you're doing multiple roles. So they don't need one person, they need a team. But I think meta above that, because that's a huge problem. I don't want to get down to the weeds because it differs, but I think meta to that, strategy is about deciding what to do and what not to do. And I think when you're in a expanding complex role with scope creep like that, you have to be really disciplined about sticking to your guns and getting alignment with the senior executive about the things you're not going to do, not get distracted by. And I think that's very hard to do for a head of marketing, a head of growth, because constantly people come and do suggestions like, oh, why aren't we on Facebook? Or how's our Google? Or how's this? Or how's that? Or I saw a friend business do that. Why aren't we on that? And you need to be able to fend that off, number one. But I think that sort of is symptomatic of not having a very clear focus strategy and just going, look, we just want one channel to work. Like, we don't need to be on everything. Do we need to be on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and all that kind of thing? Or can we just be on one? You know what I mean? Like, and I think it's just having that, drawing a line and saying, go, no, we're going to focus on this in this stage for next year and stick to it. And then we're going to move on. Look, the strategy is not getting any easier. It's very complex. So just hire me. that's my MO. Like, I help clarify that, people. But you need someone like that that's over everything to be able to, I think, give the permission to the head of growth, and then also get alignment with executives all together in a workshop environment, and stick to your guns.
I think you've touched on something now which I feel like is probably something that we need to be talking more about. And I'm not sure if you do talk about this, but literacy, marketing literacy, is that a thing that we can actually openly talk about people need in leadership roles? Because I think that would go a long way to avoiding a lot of these problems, right? Because if you had CEOs and, CFOs, COOs, everybody at a C level, or even, divisional managers, HR managers even, if they actually all understood some of these fundamentals that we're talking about now, they wouldn't be making unrealistic internal requests. They wouldn't be sitting around boardrooms planning some of the things I've been privy to, which is, a blowout on spend without absolutely any idea of what they're trying to achieve, which all have these domino effects throughout the organization because of this lack of basic literacy.
To be fair, the role has like morphed It's so much more complex now. The media landscape is just so fragmented and so changeable. Like you even just see now cable TV and linear TV, or like, traditional TV, just coming complete off the boil. It's like diving really fast. And that has really disrupted a lot of the vendor supply vertical that has been pushing certain playbooks on companies for years. And, we could sort of get caught up in just the BAU of the last 10, 20 years. And like, it's so different now. To reach that same sort of audience and breadth, you need to be on so many different mediums. So like, there's a lot of trade-offs, I think, that are very hard. But coming back to literacy, I think there's been this trend where internal staff have outsourced their role to agencies or vendors for so long that they've lost the need of that sort of background skill set of that internal working. And this is where I see this play out really badly with the internal strategy. So you should always do strategy internally and never outsource it. Like bring someone like maybe me in, or a consultant to help you formulate it, but it should be yours. You should not be relying on anybody else for that. And it should be locked down, because you need to limit that sort of principal agent problem that plagues vendor relationships. And then again, that's why the measurement piece is so important as well, because if you don't have that, you're missing the feedback loop to know if it's even worked or not, how well it's worked, and then use that to then self-improve and go around these what we call loops of growth loops, right? And if you don't do that, you're just sort of throwing spaghetti at a wall and hoping for something to stick. So, which is a very, very risk-prone strategy. Sometimes it works, which is the problem. So coming back to the core knowledge, like I was classically trained, and I think over time these terms get misinterpreted and changed, as I kind of explained. And that's why this research is so fascinating, just figuring out where we are right now, and does that deviate between older or younger, more experienced, less experienced people inside and outside the function. And what I'm noticing, to be fair to everyone, is that everyone has a very, very different take on these things. And I think that's the biggest takeaway, is that, hey, start with that alignment, get your basics like knuckled down first. What are we even talking about is in the first place? And then, what is the function in our organization? And then go from there. Not, oh, we need to hire this unicorn gun who's, adept at one or two channels and doesn't know anything about anything else.
Yeah, that alignment piece is so critical. Because my focus is so much around that alignment piece when it comes to bringing in new talent and enrolling the talent that you already have within your team. How do you feel like, or what do you think the role is that recruitment plays in this brand and marketing mix, where you think of like, if you had to say, is recruitment part of branding? Is it part of marketing? Is it completely unrelated to both? What do you feel about that?
Customers can pick up on your vibe really quickly and know whether you're authentic or not. I think so. The people you hire are representing your brand, like at all levels. Whether they're posting on social media, like personally, that's representing your brand. You know what I mean? Whether visiting them at the point of purchase, or talking to them on a sales call or something, like that is representing your brand at all those contact points. So yeah, that cumulatively should be pretty tight if you can help it. I mean, there's going to be some variation. People are all unique, but I think that provides that sort of authenticity and that reputation that can't be faked. So that's where it comes back to hiring. Having that weakest link in there, or a couple of weak links, can really damage that that sort of cohesiveness that can have quite self-fulfilling effects on the commercial performance of your company. So it is really critical. And I see maybe one of the biggest problems with performance is hiring the wrong types of people, that maybe look good on paper, but you know maybe not so good professionally, and give that wrong vibe off.
It's a tricky thing.
It is, but I mean, look, you need to have operational hygiene as well internally, right? So it's not just about the people, but the system and processes that you put them into. Like, and I think that's why this strategy is so important, like, because it sort of helps define and focus everybody, and then you have operational systems and processes around that should be really tight, so that when you hire someone, you put them into that. Like, there shouldn't be this empty hole of like, okay, we'll just go ahead and do your job. Like, there should be a lot of kind of structured guidance, that doesn't give them this kind of performance anxiety. And I think that's what the executives should be really, that's their responsibility, right? Like, hey guys, like, this is the line of sand, this is what we're doing, this is what we're about, this is where we're going, jump on board, want to have you with us, this is exactly sort of your defined scope. I'll help resource this. There's going to be politics and all that kind of thing in there, but like that, I think just provides people so much security and focus in their job, instead of running around like headless chickens trying to do so much stuff, which is a real big problem in the marketing function, especially as I mentioned, because it's so complex.
Definitely agree with all of that. For me, the way that you onboard somebody is a part of your talent strategy. Just the same way that the way that you interact with and manage your people once they've been with you for 6 months, 12 months is all a part of your talent strategy. In the same way that your product or your service is part of your marketing strategy, because otherwise it's just, lipstick on a pig, as they say. I think that gets missed a lot of times. People focus, as you said, on here's the skills we want, here's the experience we want. We just want to grab that person and then, basically chuck them into the void, and we expect them to perform. And nobody functions that way. It just doesn't set you or your business up for success. And I think that's oftentimes missed in the rush to fill a role. It's all about that front end piece. And, just as you said, there's all sorts of smoke and mirrors that sometimes can go on in that side. And it does set unrealistic expectations up. And it also cripples you on the other side once people come in and things are chaos.
Just one thing I've noticed, right, that I think a lot of people don't mention around sort of internal culture is commercial success breeds a better culture. So I think people can try and manufacture this culture and say, hey, well, this and this and that. I've found that when a company is doing well and they've got the commercial strategy working really well, sales are flowing in, it's like the lifeblood, cash flows there. Everybody within the organization de-stresses. Executives hitting their target, they're happier, they can resource things better. Those functions get the things that they on the wish list. They get empowered because they're like, oh wow, I can do that thing I've always wanted to do now. There's a bit more play within the budgets, for wastage, maybe, like in an experimental sort of way. So I think that commercial performance is so good. Then you attract more people because people are, oh, look at that company, they're doing really well. Oh, they're hiring more people. Like, oh, there's a buzz about it, and suddenly all your culture problems have been fixed just because the performance of the company is solid. And that is, I think, so overlooked. That's why I'm saying, I don't get too bogged down internally, because it's kind of like it works itself out. If you don't have narcissists and sociopaths in your team, or too many of them, if you're performing well, those problems are solved. I'm sorry.
I absolutely 100% agree with you. It's so interesting when I go into a client who they have great offices, and they don't have to be top notch, but obviously it helps if they are, but they have great offices. Everything is well resourced, as you said. The people there are clear on what they are there to do. They have the support and the tools to do a good job. The customers are happy, and so they're not constantly dealing with miserable people who are whinging and bitching at them. The whole environment is so much more appealing. It means that people are happier at work. It means that they're more productive. It means that customers are happier. And that rolling stone gathers moss, as you said. Whereas the converse is equally true. When people are expected to do their job with both their hands tied behind their back, with substandard equipment and machinery, with customers who are complaining about a substandard product, with penny pinching everywhere and a ton of pressure to reach unrealistic goals. There's only one way that goes, and it doesn't matter if your mission is to save the world. At that point, it's completely irrelevant.
And I think, like I said, it's a cross-functional piece as well. So commercial success is really hard without that dynamic of everyone sort of working together, and you're as good as that sort of weakest link, because it's a system that is all working together. So you can't just isolate that department, silo that, and have one working where the others aren't working, and vice versa. So that success breeds a bit more of that cohesion as well, I found. And when you go into a company that's not performing, if it's not macro sort of economic factors, or the sector's dying or whatever, which sometimes is the case, what I find the next biggest problem is just that disconnection of that system not working. And if you fix that, you'd be surprised what can happen, and that can be self-fulfilling. And anyway, that's where I start generally.
So the nutshell version of what people need to take away from this is you need to hire John.
And hire some good people, because generally, probably have some pretty bad team members in there. So maybe, hire you as well. Could be a double team, double trouble there, get us both into the organization.
No, that's great. That really wraps up, I think, what we came here today to capture for everybody. So thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good. Enjoyed it. Thank you very much.